Hello, hypothetical audience, and welcome to some hazy cosmic jive. I'm JJNW'S Ghost, and for today's jive, I wanted to go back to 1998 and talk about a show called Experiments Lain. Now, I don't remember when I was first introduced to Lain. I'd estimate probably about 7 or 8 years ago. I was aware of its reputation as a cyberpunk anime with various different gosh, I sound like Charles Barkley, with various different interpretations as to both its themes and its overall plot. I was mostly interested in it because it had the same head writer as Digimon Tamers. Now, a far cry from Digimon Adventure, Tamers starts innocent enough, with an uncomfortable moment here or there before devolving into a full-on horror show for its final arc. I remember loving that as a kid, and I did rewatch it. I believe it was last year, the year before, with Clay, and it still holds up really well. Now, I watched Lain when I was first aware of it, and it didn't do much for me. I do remember feeling uncomfortable when I would walk near a power line and, I would hear that telltale hum. But that's one of the only things I took from the show, aside from Let's All Love Lain and the opening, which is a certified banger. But a couple weeks ago, a few friends of mine started watching Lain, and their conversations and enthusiasm for it convinced me to give it a rewatch. And, of course, I wanted to talk about my experience. So what I decided to do is take notes for every episode while I'm watching them about what sticks out to me. And then I want to make a short video just about each individual episode and my experience with it. I want to go over things like the basic plot, if there's any particular shots that really stood out to me, and what are the major themes that I'm picking up on from each individual episode and how they contribute to the larger themes of the whole narrative. So, without further ado, let's log in to Serial Experiments Lain. Layer 01, Weird. What stuck out the most from this episode is the show's use of the color white. There's a gorgeous shot where we see nothing but white until Lain opens a door. She emerges from this white mass, and then as soon as she closes the door, all traces of it completely disappear. She walks down the street, and there's these black and red, kind of globs and shapes. Some of it is on the side, some of it is in her shadow. That almost looks like it's some form of corruption or virus that's spreading. And all the while, the power lines around her just have this ominous hum. All I could think of when I was watching that moment is how much I would love a poster of that shot, of Lain coming out of the door, or Lain just closing the door. It's just how beautiful it looked. And I think white is a really great color when it's being used to show emptiness or loneliness. One of the best examples I can think of is there's an episode of SpongeBob when it's the one where Squidward gets a time machine. So he goes to the future and so he doesn't get the time machine first. He freezes himself, ends up in the future, then gets a time machine to try to get back home, but he goes too far, ends up with a bunch of cavemen like SpongeBob and Patrick. He breaks the time machine, then he ends up in this endless white space. And what initially he sees as very relaxing, he can finally be alone with his thoughts, it quickly turns into horror when he realizes just how alone he is here. And I feel like loneliness is one of the big themes I can already start to see forming in Lain. The internet, the Wired, is what connects the whole world. But reality itself is still a lonely place if you choose to ignore the people around you, or, you lack access to the Wired. This one shot, at least to me, got all of that across in just a few seconds without a single line of dialogue. The plot in this episode is that a girl in Lain's class committed suicide, but her classmates are still getting emails from the dead girl. Lane gets one as well, and that girl talks about The Wired and how great it is, that even though she died, it's kind of like she found got a new lease on life inside there. Now, it's clear that The Wired isn't just the afterlife, because we do see regular, clearly still living people accessing it. But the show does go out of its way to make it feel like it's this completely other world, but not a parallel world, because these two are just intrinsically connected. There's a point when Lane is in class, and she's just looking at the chalkboard, but then she sees this message in like her teacher's notes, something kind of like something out of the Matrix, that's just telling her to come to The Wired. And then she ends up speaking to her dad to see if she can get an upgraded computer, and her dad agrees. I love that her dad is introduced by sitting behind just 6 monitors while he's talking to Lane, because it does make it, it makes a literal wall between them. And as someone who lived through the 2010s and first couple years of the 2020s, I've heard all the jokes and the monologues decrying how people, particularly like millennials and Zoomers, spend too much time on screens and not enough time having real face-to-face conversations or interactions with people. So to see that playing out in a show written all the way back in 1998 is both impressive and also just kind of unsettling. Like, it ever so slightly feels like I'm living in someone else's idea of a dystopian future. And so, while overall I did enjoy the first episode, I will say it is very much a slow burn, and there are some moments that feel like they're just weird for the sake of being weird. For example, there's a scene where Lane is sitting in class and then she stares at her hand, and then her fingers just start leaking mist. I don't know why that's there. I don't know what that contributed to the plot or the themes of the show. But overall, the striking visuals and the strong thematic foundations from this episode did get me excited for the rest of my rewatch. And as one final note, Lane also has this hoodie that's just her in a bear costume, and it's actually really precious. I'm recording this after I've watched and written down kind of my notes on the first 6 episodes, and we really don't see much of the bear hoodie beyond this one, and I kind of wish we did. But it also makes a lot of sense that we don't, so I can't really be that upset about it. But overall, enjoyed the first episode, and we'll see where it goes from here. Layer 02, Girls. This episode starts with a man at a club purchasing and taking a drug. The drug seems like it's supposed to make someone super hyper-aware and is also very addictive. The man spots a young woman at a club that has a striking resemblance to Lane, except she seems much more confident and assertive. Later, a few girls from Lane's class, including her good friend Alice, talk about seeing a woman at the club that looked a lot like her and invite her to go clubbing with them. Lane has no memory of being at the club and is very hesitant about going out. She also starts seeing this man in black lurking in the shadows of her school and her neighborhood. She arrives home from school and learns that her dad did end up buying her a computer and got her a really top-of-the-line one. And, she talks to him about having him help her assemble it. He's like, okay, yeah, we'll do it after dinner. And then she kind of forcibly brings it up right after again. Like, yeah, we'll do it after dinner. Hey, can you help me set it up? And then he does. So then Lane and her friends end up going to the club. The drug user from the beginning is there and he has a gun. He starts rambling about The Wired, how terrified he is of it. But then he starts freaking out even more when he sees Lane. He demands to know why she's there, why she's making him do this, and talks about how The Wired can't interfere with the real world. And while everyone else in the club is just, running out in terror, Lane is just standing there. Alice had already run out, but when she sees that Lane is still there, she goes back for her. And then Lane's assertive side pops out, and she hits this guy with a truth bomb. No matter where you go, everyone's connected. This is his breaking point, and then he commits suicide, leaving Lane's face stained with his blood. This episode introduces one of the biggest questions I had when I watched Lane the first time. Who is she? Is she this soft-spoken introvert, just kind of wants to go through life and keeping her head down? But the Wired keeps worming its way into her life to the point where she just kind of can't ignore it. Or is all of that a front for someone who's a lot more forceful and aggressive, but hides her true nature since it just kind of makes life easier? It's like, is she both? Like, she starts as the first, but evolves into the second as the series progresses? Or is this like a split personality? And I'm also starting to wonder how much of this is going to turn into a theme about anonymity. We've all read comments on social media, and we understand just how nasty they can be at times, how empowering it can be to say something without fear of repercussions. It's like when I hear people, either in person or again in comments, talk about like LeBron James, and then they'll talk about like, oh yeah, he's not that great, or you get all the memes like La Carried or La Saved by La Legacy Saved by Ray Allen, stuff like that. But people wouldn't say anything like that to his face. I feel like that's what I'm going to be getting out of Lane's character on the second time around. She's far more outspoken when the Wired is involved, due to the amount of power that it gives her, which contrasts with her normally meek and quiet persona when the Wired isn't involved and she's just another average person. I generally don't vibe with this kind of show. I prefer stories that are clearly told, but still have some room to interpret your character choices and potential themes, compared to something where the story is more vague in favor of really just expanding on a theme. Watching the first 2 episodes does remind me of why I didn't get into it the first time. But taking my notes and then really thinking about what I watched and what I'm getting out of it is honestly making me enjoy it a lot more than I expected to. Now, there's still 11 episodes to go, and I may completely change my tune by the time we're all done. But I will say, I am having a lot of fun so far, and I'm looking forward to seeing where this all goes.